This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Thanks, Squarespace. So Breath of the Wild 2 finally got a new trailer this E3, and it looks incredible. It's been over 2 years since the game's announcement, and while the wait was long, it was most certainly worth it. There's a ton of information to unpack here, so this video will be breaking down what we see in the trailer, as well as my own personal opinions on the details present. I'm going to try my best to be as thorough as possible, but I also want to save certain topics for later videos, so without further ado, let's get started. First, we'll go through all the shots of the trailer and analyze them, and after that, talk about some of the different theories about the sequel. Many of you have reached out with interesting observations and details, and I'll be including some of these in this analysis. This includes details pointed out by other YouTubers that I find to be interesting. The trailer begins with malice seeping into the shot from the lower left of the screen. Like the first trailer, the substance takes on a much more blood-reddish color, and its movement is tendril-like. These characteristics are never seen with Breath of the Wild's malice, and it makes sense as Ganondorf was sealed at the time. Since the seal has weakened, the Gerudo King has much more malice at his disposal and would have better control over it. It was capable of taking over the Sheikah technology and reanimating corpses, so it's interesting to think of what it will be capable of in the sequel. While this footage plays, two other shots are presented to us, one of Link and Ganondorf himself. Both are very quick, but provide us with some interesting information. In the first shot, some of Ganondorf's malice is spreading up Link's right arm all the way to his shoulder. This happens to be the same arm that the Green Hand merges with in the first trailer. Unlike most Zelda games, Link is right-handed in Breath of the Wild, so it's possible that the malice is being used to incapacitate his combat abilities. A few frames of the shot show that Link is wielding the Master Sword, since you can see the hilt of it in the lower right. It's likely that this takes place around the time of the first trailer, where Link and Zelda discover the hand sealing Ganondorf. He's wearing the champion tunic, but lacks the Hylian hood seen previously. It's likely that this will be Nintendo's way of taking the Master Sword away from the player. In Wind Waker, Link attacks Ganondorf with a weakened blade, which results in it doing no damage. The hero could be either attacking Ganondorf or his malice early on, discovering that the Master Sword has lost its power, in which the malice then goes after Link's right arm. It may be one of the end goals the player must work to, restoring the power of the Master Sword so that they can confront and seal Ganondorf. Speaking of Ganondorf, the following shot doesn't necessarily give us any new information, but it does confirm some things from the first trailer. We were given this shot revealing some holes on Ganondorf's body, which seemed kind of strange. But the following scene also shows a hole in the palm of his hand. This same detail is present in the new trailer, meaning that it's not some trick of the eye. Ganondorf does have holes in his hand crucifix style, and the question now is, why? The answer may be as simple as it being additional restraints put on the Demon King. At the time of Breath of the Wild sequel, this seal has weakened to the point of Ganondorf breaking free, so perhaps the other holes in his body are remnants of this seal. From the shot alone, we can spot the following puncture wounds in his body, and some of them may have also been caused by the hand. It looks like Ganondorf's wrists also have holes in them, and you can get a faint glimpse of the big hole that was covered by the Green Hand in the initial teaser trailer. There's something interesting about Ganondorf's choice of clothing, but we'll go over that a bit later in this analysis. Around his waist is a piece of cloth wrapped around a horseshoe or omega-shaped object. In a way, it sort of resembles the harp symbols found in some other Zelda games. And judging from the angle of the shot, it appears to be taken from a lower angle looking up at Ganondorf. Next, we have a scene of Zelda falling into what looks like a bottomless chasm. We can safely assume that this takes place immediately after the shot from the first trailer, where the ground crumbles under her, and that she'll most likely survive the fall. This is where the real trailer begins. A bright light envelops the screen, leading into a shot of Link free-falling into the sky. The first thing you'll notice are the floating islands below, and that wherever we are, it's very high up in the sky, within the clouds. So high that we can't really see the surface. The way Link dives down is very similar to Skyward Sword, another Zelda game that happens to deal with floating islands. I have a feeling that this may be around the tutorial part of the game, specifically the floating islands portion. The island Link is diving to has paths on the ground, and the landmass appears to be cut off from the other part of the island as there's no bridge. This floating island may serve a similar purpose as the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild. At first I thought this island had a giant lake, but it could also be a shadow cast by some of the clouds above. The fact that Link is diving down to this island is interesting since it makes you wonder where he jumped from. The light transition in the shot could imply that Link hopped through some sort of portal to get up this high. One of the biggest details about this scene is Link himself. He's wearing a completely different outfit compared to the traditional champion's tunic getup. A green cloth is wrapped around his left shoulder with some sort of symbol. Unfortunately, we don't get to see what this symbol is, as most of it's out of view, but I'm very interested in what it's supposed to be, especially if this outfit is as important as the champion's tunic from the first game. Unlike his original design, this Link's hair isn't tied up, and he's wearing some sandal-like footwear. But the feature that sticks out the most is his right arm, the same one that was attacked by the Malice and fused with the green energy, which visually looks like it's in very bad shape. There's also some markings that extend beyond his shoulder to the back and most likely his chest. And I'll go into more detail about those a bit later. In the upper right of this shot appears to be a giant floating structure, and this leads us into the following shot. We're still in the sky, but it's now nighttime. There's another building in the top right of the screen, which may be the one seen previously. It stands out compared to the other structures and floating islands, so this place is without a doubt of some importance. Perhaps a dungeon. For the most part, Link's outfit remains the same, though he appears to have equipped a different set of boots. Another detail you may have noticed in both this shot and the previous one is that Link lacks the Master Sword. In fact, you never see the blade after this initial scene of the Malice consuming his arm. There are some occasions where he wields a sword, but it's never the Master Sword. Further evidence that suggests that the Malice somehow renders the blade useless against the Calamity. It's worth noting that Link is using a different paraglider in this game. The first one had the Rito crest on it, and while this new one appears to also use this symbol, as the bottom of it is seen, the rest of the design is different. It may be yet another version of the royal family's crest. The paraglider also has two streamers on the back of it, something that Zeltik pointed out in his analysis, where some concept art of Breath of the Wild included these in its rough design. Their purpose is to show the direction of the wind, and considering a lot of this game will take place on floating islands, this detail may be important when traversing the terrain. And the shield that Link is using is something not seen in Breath of the Wild. It sort of resembles the Sheikah Eye, so maybe the symbol is a more ancient version of the one often seen in the Zelda franchise. The shot gives us a pretty good look at the bottom of the floating islands, which appear to have a blocky sort of look, resembling that of the structures found on the terrain. And we still can't really see the surface of Hyrule similar to the previous shot. It's clear that the sequel will have more of a focus on the skies above Hyrule, as stated by Onuma at the end of the trailer, but I do have a theory of my own. If Zelda falls deep underground, and Link is sent to the skies, perhaps the story will be split between two parts. Link exploring the open world of Hyrule, including its skies, and Zelda traversing through the underground caverns of the kingdom. I'm hoping that what was shown in this trailer is only a fraction of the actual game, and that we'll get another trailer solely focused on underground exploration. Anyways, back to the trailer. There's this gorgeous shot of Link running across one of the floating islands. It looks like these locations may include their own wildlife, as we do see 3 birds on the surface. There's some stonework to the right and left of the shot, both feature engravings. Again, these structures don't resemble ones from Breath of the Wild, as both the ancient Hylian and Zonai ruins differ in design. There are some possible connections to the latter which we'll go over later, but there's enough of a difference to suggest that these were constructed by a new group or race. One of the patterns found on the structures to the left is one that appears repeatedly throughout the trailer, which isn't too surprising, and right below that are some visible markings. I believe this pattern is also found on some of the other shots, though I'm not 100% certain. For some reason, they stick out compared to the rest of the stone. It could be the lighting or that they're a different color. At the end of this path is what appears to be a gate. I believe this structure is also placed at the end of the floating island, so a part of me wonders if these gates will be scattered across the floating islands and will act as portals connecting the landmasses, or that they'll be used to switch between the surface and sky portions of the game. Another structure is visible in the background, on one of the other islands, and it resembles the one that Link is walking towards. We then get a first look at what may be one of the new enemies of Breath of the Wild sequel, a mechanical being with a design different to that of Sheikah technology. Its head sort of resembles a frog, with 2 eyes on the sides of the face and a mouth. The figure wears earrings which may be based off of an upside-down Sheikah eye with its overall shape and 3 eyelashes. Part of these earrings feature a pattern also present on ruins such as the giant dragon statue consuming the Spring of Courage, Sargon Bridge, and the exterior of the temple shown off in the first trailer of the sequel. In fact, many on Twitter have pointed out the similarity of the eye to the one representing Vati at the Four-Sword Sanctuary. Even the symbols of the shield itself closely resemble the bits on the robot. On its sides are 2 pinecone-shaped objects, and they remind me of closed lotus flowers. This same object is actually paired with some of the Sky Island structures, including ones in the background of this shot, as well as another one. Because this item is seen on both the mechanical being and ruins, it means that they are connected in some way. But the biggest detail to take away here comes from this thing's spine, as we see a green energy flowing through it, likely the same one found on Ganondorf's seal and the mysterious hand. Therefore, I believe this being serves a similar purpose as Godin from Wind Waker or Mazel from Minish Cap. It acts as a sort of guardian to the Sky Ruins and may test the hero with trials, whether it be puzzles or through combat. If there's one thing this creature reminds me of, it's definitely the technology found within Skyward Sword's Lanayru province, such as the mining facility and sandship. We don't know much about the group who constructed the ancient robots, so perhaps there is a connection. Lastly, there's some sort of circular symbol on the robot, and I'm not sure what it's supposed to represent. The center of it is shaped like a broom, some have even described it as a clock, though it's worth noting that it's off-center if it were to be a clock hand. Directly behind the robot is an archway, and it looks like it has the same design as the ones from before, but it may be a different location. And to the right are stairs leading up to a shrine-like structure. Engraved into it, the same pattern as seen previously. The front pillars get more narrow as you move down the structure, making it somewhat resemble fangs of a serpent. And the patterns on the side of the shrine remind me of the ones found on the massive dragon statue within the Faron region. But again, what's seen on the floating islands may have nothing to do with the Zonai of Breath of the Wild. There's so much more to unpack when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2's recent trailer, but before we continue with that, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is a very useful tool for those who want to make their own website but lack the experience. And if you head to the link in the description, squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis, using code NintendoBlackCrisis, you can get 10% off your first purchase.
Sorry, Zelda, can't save you now. I've got money to save.
Don't worry, I'm sure she's okay. Meanwhile, I've been making my own website, and it's pretty awesome. Squarespace gives you plenty of tools to work with, and it's super easy to add in an image or some text. I've had a suggestions page on the website for quite some time and have already gotten several messages from you guys, whether it be for theories or other topics. And of course, I'm featuring the Zonai series at the very top of my video page. I mean, why wouldn't I? I have a feeling this page is soon gonna be flooded with Breath of the Wild 2 content since we finally got another trailer. Oh yeah, speaking of trailers, Zelda's still in that pit. I should probably go save her. Wait, what's that? Oh, you mean I can finish up the rest of the sponsor before I go do that? Wow, thanks Zelda, you sure are nice. There's plenty of custom templates to use, whether it's a website for business or personal reasons, so if you're not sure how you want your website to look, you can always start from there. Squarespace is very flexible with its options, and it's easy to change something if you're not satisfied with how it looks. And in case you get stuck, there is 24/7 support. So thanks again to the lovely people over at Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and you can start your own free trial right now and get 10% off your first purchase. That's squarespace.com/NINTENDOBLACKCRISIS, and using the code NintendoBlackCrisis. Alright Zelda, I'm coming to save you now. Zelda?
Zelda! Zelda?
The next shot of the trailer gives us our first look at Breath of the Wild 2's Hyrule. For the most part, it seems similar, though there are some significant changes in the background. You may notice that Link is back in his traditional outfit with a champion's tunic and traveler's shield. It's possible that his outfit will switch between this one and the one from the sky whenever he transitions from one location to the other. But we also have to take into account the possibility of multiple armor sets, similar to the first game. He still uses the same paraglider as before, a detail worth remembering for later. Of course, the first thing you'll notice is the Bokoblin Camp atop a stone talus within Hyrule Field. It looks like the talus's weak point still exists, so destroying that may bring down the entire fort. In fact, the Bokoblins appear to have added some wood barriers, making it impossible to hit the weak spot from certain angles. Notice the spikes below the wooden platforms in some of the areas, which makes climbing up the talus more challenging. But it looks like there are spots where Link can still climb up, though he'll also need to be careful of the Bokoblin archers. When you spend too much time on top of a stone talus in Breath of the Wild, he shakes you off, but I'm not sure if this enemy will still do that since there are now Bokoblins on its head. On the topic of Bokoblins, they now appear to have very long horns. A lot of people seemed surprised that the Bokoblins have horns to begin with, but in reality they've always had horns. It's one of the drops you get from them, and you can even see it on top of their head. For some reason, they're a lot bigger in the sequel. I agree with HMK's take on this, where he suggests that it's because Ganon has complete control over his malice now that he's free. Naturally, he would be much more powerful in this game. It's the simplest and most logical answer in my opinion. In the beginning of the shot, two mysterious structures are seen sticking out of the ground. These weren't present in the first game, and their design resembles the ruins atop the floating islands. Assuming that the previous shots were taken far above the skies of Hyrule, these could be parts of the island structures that have fallen to the ground. Many viewers have also pointed out two more interesting details. One is that Death Mountain appears to be inactive, with no lava flowing down the sides. Perhaps more of this location will be explorable in the sequel, it may even hold a dungeon. The other is the lack of the Deku Tree in the background. You may have also noticed a lack of Sheikah technology, which, in terms of the story, makes sense. Calamity Ganon has been defeated, therefore this technology has served its purpose and has most likely sunk back into the ground. We don't even see Guardians in the trailer. It does make me wonder if they'll tie the ending of Breath of the Wild into the beginning of the sequel, where Zelda and Link head to Zora's Domain once Varuta stops working. And on the topic of the Divine Beasts, I'm not sure if we'll get an explanation as to what happened to them. Unlike the shrines, towers, and columns, they can't simply sink back into the ground, but since the sequel isn't about this technology, it's not really a big deal. They've served their purpose, and are now gone. This leads us into one of the more interesting scenes of the trailer, a shot of what appears to be the green hand fusing with Link's right arm. The bracing surrounding his arm is the same as the one from the green hand in the first trailer. It has the same overall shape, especially the circular part on the back of the hand, and it too has engravings that occasionally glow a greenish color. Judging from Link's posture, he appears to be lying down on the floor, atop a circular pedestal. In the background of the shot is a sort of script unlike anything we've seen in previous Zelda games. And like the language of the Sheikah and Hylians, this too will probably be translatable to the Latin alphabet. Its design is unique, suggesting that this script comes from a whole new group. Now, back to the arm. The engravings on the bracing light up and flow down from Link's shoulder to his hand. The glow on his arm is only brief, as you can see it fade away, revealing his new arm, which takes on a much darker color similar to the close-up of him free-falling. You can even see the bracing in the shot, including the ones of Link in his champion tunic. This is a very important detail to remember for later. Part of Link's right side of the body is also visible, though he's also shirtless. Assuming this takes place shortly after the events of the game, I'm curious as to how he wound up in this state. Did he remove his champion's tunic? Did somebody else do it for him? Zelda's already fallen into the pit. At least, that's the current assumption. Since his new outfit only covers the left side of his body, he could also be wearing that at this time. The clothing on his lower half is also different, perhaps it's his underwear. It's very similar to how Link starts off his adventures in the first game, as he's wearing nothing but his boxers. One other detail linking his right hand back to the one sealing Ganondorf are the fingernails. They aren't nearly as long as the ones from the first trailer, but they are definitely longer than Link's. It makes sense as this hand is a sort of fusion between his and the one responsible for the seal. Going back to this scene with the malice consuming Link's arm, one possibility is that the green hand fuses with Link's to stop the spread of malice, and that it acts as a sort of curse. The markings seen on Link's shoulder and back could be from the fusion of the green hand, but it may also represent a spreading of this malice curse. But there are things about this trailer that, when compared to the first, are kind of strange. In this shot, Link's right arm is glowing green, suggesting that this is when he merges with the hand. But the one thing he lacks is the bracing. In addition, the Master Sword is currently on his back. Either this detail was changed later in development, or this takes place before the other scene. So it's possible that Link obtains this power, the malice goes after the Master Sword in his arm, and then the shot from the second trailer happens sometime after. It's a bit harder to explain the events which would cause this progression of story, since the green hand fusing to replace or heal Link's arm sounds pretty likely. And there's also the possibility of the arm choosing to save Link from falling as opposed to maintaining Ganondorf's seal, resulting in the return of the Gerudo King. Next shot, we cut to Link using a stasis-like ability on the spiked ball rolling down what could be Death Mountain. And there's a lot to take away from this scene. Instead of using the Sheikah Slate, this power appears to originate from Link's new hand, as it can be seen once the image is enhanced. One of the most popular theories is that the hand would be Breath of the Wild 2's main mechanic, as seen from the concept art from the first game, where Link uses his arm for different abilities. Chances are this is only one of the many powers that the hero will have access to thanks to the green hand. When Link uses this ability, a bright golden color emanates from his right hand, and on the back of the hand appears to be another bright light. It's very similar to when one uses the Triforce, so it's possible that the relic appears on Link's right hand when using this power. However, I also believe that this glow may be coming from a part of the bracing, as the area directly behind Link's hand features a circular pattern. I do hope the Triforce is more prominent in this game though, as it was never mentioned in Breath of the Wild nor had any real relevance to the story. The power itself is worth discussing. The color is very similar to the Stasis Rune, however this ability takes time manipulation to a whole new level. The surrounding area changes to black and white, and the spiked ball pauses briefly before being shot backwards into the oncoming enemies. While frozen, a series of after images of the ball's previous locations are seen along with the path taken by this object. It's clear that this ability involves the reversal of time, very different to stasis, a power that simply freezes an object in place. In fact, you can even see the ball align with its after images as it rolls back up the mountain, as it is literally going back through time. I'm curious as to whether the black and white aesthetic will remain in the final version, or if it was only added to the trailer for show. It sort of reminds me of the seal placed on Hyrule Castle in The Wind Waker. When you first arrive, all enemies are frozen in place, the area devoid of color. After Link obtains the Master Sword, the castle is restored to its former state, which both unfreezes the enemies and brings back the color. The Bokoblins aren't the only ones to get a redesign, as the Moblins now wear a skull-like helmet. That, or it's a part of the head itself. In the first game, these enemies had long horns. I'm assuming that all other enemies will have slight adjustments to them, and I'm sort of curious as to what the Lizalfos will look like, as well as where this spiked ball came from. Did an enemy throw it or kick it down the hill? Breath of the Wild occasionally has boulders and snowballs roll down the terrain, but those are more of natural occurrences. We cut to another scene with Champion Link, and he's using some sort of flamethrower weapon against a new type of enemy not seen in Breath of the Wild. It appears to be attached to the ceiling, and looks similar to a like or lever. The fact that it's a new enemy gives me hope that we'll see others such as Redeads and Darknuts. It's safe to assume that the strange-looking bulb in the center is its weak point, and like a flower, it can close its mouth to protect it from Link's attacks. The design of the item used looks exactly the same as the Zonai Dragon Head spread all across Hyrule, and it's the only solid connection to this tribe, as everything else presented in the trailer could be from a different group of people. What's interesting is that this item seems to be powered by the same green energy as the robot, as a few frames of the shot reveal parts of the mouth and eyes to be glowing. Link is using his left hand, so it's not the green arm that's giving him this ability. It's another example of technology powered by a form of energy. But when you look closely, the dragon head is actually attached to a shield. The question I have is the flamethrower item exclusive to this shield, or will we have different shield attachments that we can swap throughout the game? The location itself appears to be underground, perhaps a small room in a bigger dungeon. There's a platform at the back of the chamber reminiscent of the ones found at the Goddess Springs, though it doesn't have anything on it. Perhaps a chest will spawn there once we defeat this enemy. On the floor of the room is a circular pattern with more script that resembles the one found on the sky structures. In fact, the walls of the room are the same as the ones of this previous shot. One detail Zeltik pointed out that I missed is that another set of markings are visible on the stone, ones that are also seen on these columns. And it makes sense given the other similarities between both architecture. But there's one detail about this scene that intrigues me. Some assume that this shot takes place on the interior of one of the Sky Islands, but notice what outfit the hero is wearing. His champion's tunic, which has consistently been paired with gameplay taking place on Hyrule's surface. Meanwhile, all of the shots within the sky have Link in his more ancient outfit. Therefore, I believe that this chamber isn't located up in the skies, but deep underground on Hyrule's surface, which is interesting to think about since we may see more of this sky architecture beneath the ground. Since Link is using the shield, it also gives us a better look at the bow and sword currently equipped. The latter is especially hard to see in the other shots since it's covered up by the shield. On the topic of equipment, Link has nothing in the first shot of him free-falling down to the floating islands, another detail hinting this to be the start of the game. Next, we see a quick shot of a water droplet and puddle. But something is clearly off about it. This whole sequence is played in reverse as it goes from the splash to the droplet moving upwards. Yet another hint that much of this game will involve time manipulation. But at the moment it's unclear whether this is purely a gameplay mechanic or will have some sort of impact on the overall story. I find the shape of the crater in the ground very strange as it looks a bit artificial or man-made, but that's more of a minor detail. The next scene has a lot more to unpack. Link appears to be diving upwards and phases through the bottom of the structure, reappearing on top of it. Again, the green energy is seen spiraling around him and slowly dissipates once he reaches the top. The hand seems to be glowing at this point, so it's safe to say that this is one of its powers being used. Now, it could be a gameplay mechanic incorporated into the game's puzzles, but another idea is that this is the animation played when fast traveling from the surface to the floating islands. The puddle seen in the previous shot could even be connected to this. Perhaps the player interacts with these locations to ascend to different parts of the sky. But the former is also plausible, as you can see a platform just below the point where Link is jumping. If this extends to the point beneath him, it would most likely be a gameplay mechanic that will be used for puzzles. This time, we get a better look at one of the shrine-like structures, and this is why I have my doubts about its design being Zonai related. The way it's cropped out in the first shot makes it look like the fangs of a dragon, but when the rest is visible, it just looks like a regular structure. A part of its walls feature some engravings unique to this building, with what could be an altar or table at the back. In fact, I believe that this same shrine is what's seen in the first shot of the floating islands, as well as some other locations. If the gates aren't portals connecting the islands, then perhaps these serve that same purpose. Or the gates are what lets the player travel from island to island, and these shrines will take you back to the surface. If what we saw previously is a fast travel animation, it's happening right beside one of these shrines. In fact, the gates and other structures seen appear to have a bit of a Japanese aesthetic to them, which is interesting. The same pinecone-shaped objects are found at this location, very similar to the previous shot with the robot, and the ground is made up of a unique pattern, though there's nothing noteworthy about it. What's interesting is that this is the only shot where Hyrule's surface is clearly visible. It's around the area of Thundra Plateau since you can see the mushroom-like trees close to the Ridgeland Tower. MaskedNintendoBandit made an interesting observation in one of his videos, and that was the fact that some of the ancient Hylian pillars within Breath of the Wild are missing in the shot of the sequel's trailer. The rest of the E3 trailer is focused on Hyrule Castle itself. We get a close-up shot of the location rising into the air, parts of the castle crumbling. But not all of it is lifted upwards, since locations such as the gatehouse remain grounded. and the force lifting this massive structure is revealed. Directly beneath it is an incredible amount of malice seeping out from underground. Some speculated that Ganondorf's corpse may have been located somewhere that wasn't Hyrule Castle, but it seems pretty clear from this trailer that this is the location he was sealed. In fact, it looks like his malice is literally pushing up the castle as if it's one giant hand. The final shot of the sequence shows Hyrule Castle, now raised and once again surrounded by malice. Castletown is visible from this shot, and since it's still ruined, the events shown in the sequel may have taken place mere weeks after the first games. One thing I'd like to point out is the bottom of the landmass supporting Hyrule Castle. We can't see the bottom of the middle column since the malice is blocking the way. There's a chance that the castle isn't floating and it's being supported by a giant pillar which has ascended, but there's nothing else to support this idea. Chances are that it's floating. In fact, it's similar to Ganondorf's castle in Ocarina of Time, where it hovers over what looks like a pit of lava. In the 3DS version, this is retextured and looks a lot more like Malice. I also think of Skyward Sword's sealed grounds when it comes to this shot. By the end of Skyward Sword, a part of Skyloft comes back down, directly on top of the seal put on Demise. And in the sequel's trailer, the chunk of land Hyrule Castle is sitting on is above what we can assume is Ganondorf's location. But I don't think this is supposed to be the same area as the sealed grounds, as the Forgotten Temple has plenty of evidence to suggest that it's where these ruins lay. And that's basically the trailer. Before I dive into some of the theories spreading around, I want to talk about its music. The opening piece definitely gives me Skyward Sword vibes, which isn't too surprising. Much of Breath of the Wild 2's inspiration appears to come from Skyward Sword. When I listen to the trailer's music, it makes me think of a piece called Ballad of the Goddess. Some people believe that the audio playing when Hyrule Castle rises into the sky sounds like the background music of Rome's prophecy cutscene when put into reverse. Personally, I think they're unrelated. In fact, the music played just sounds like a sped-up version of the theme from the first trailer. And lastly, some notes from Zelda's Lullaby play in the final shot of the sequel's trailer. Now I'll be addressing some of the popular theories regarding Breath of the Wild 2 and give my own thoughts. Because we see two separate outfits in the trailer, one for the floating island portion and the other being his getup from Breath of the Wild, many believe that we'll be playing as two different Links. But there's a ton of evidence that suggests these are the same person. Both Links use the same paraglider, as well as wear the same type of earrings. And like we've previously established, the champion Link also has the dark-skinned arm. It's seen in all of his shots, especially the one underground. The last detail many point to is the difference in hairstyle compared to Breath of the Wild's. His hair isn't tied up in the floating islands portion of the trailer, and appears to be much longer. But in Breath of the Wild, there were outfits that would change his hairstyle altogether. In fact, the ancient armor reveals that Link has incredibly long hair. Therefore, his look in Breath of the Wild 2 could simply be a different outfit he's wearing. A lot of people have already connected this outfit to the one of the ancient hero, and I do see the connection. But I don't think this is proof that we'll be playing as Breath of the Wild Link for the surface parts, and the ancient hero for the sky bits. But I do believe that this outfit is supposed to be the same one that was worn by the ancient hero long ago, and that it's a callback of sorts. I saw an interesting post that this yellow part of the ancient hero's shoulder of the tapestry could be the symbol of the cloth wrapped around Link's shoulder, which may be connected. On the topic of connections, remember Ganondorf's clothing? Well, just like Link, there's a cloth wrapped around his left shoulder. But due to this, many are assuming that the Link we're playing as in the sky is actually the same person that turns into Ganondorf later on. I don't understand why this connection is being made since there's nothing that supports this idea. In fact, most of the evidence contradicts this. There's no doubt a connection between Link and Ganondorf's clothing, but that connection could be as simple as it being the thing people wore from this time period. And that's assuming this game has time travel. Speaking of time travel, it's probably the most popular theory being spread around at the moment. If both Links are actually the same, and we visit floating islands with architecture that differs from Breath of the Wild's, are the bits with the ancient Link happening in Hyrule's past? Are we reliving the events told 10,000 years ago? First, I'll discuss the evidence for this, and then provide a counter-argument. Exhibit A. The hero's outfit in the floating islands part of the trailer may be referencing the same outfit as the ancient hero. In addition, the odd color of this hero's hand could be referencing the green arm that Link obtains. Exhibit B. The events of the tapestry may actually be of the actions of the hero of the future going back to the past. Exhibit C. All the floating islands appear to be of new locations never seen in Breath of the Wild, with architecture not matching any of the ruins we know of in the first game. And none of these islands are visible in Hyrule surface shots. Exhibit D. Some of Hyrule's landmarks are missing, such as the ancient Hylian columns close to the Serra's Scablands and the Great Deku Tree. Death Mountain also appears to be inactive as no lava is flowing. Exhibit E. Enemies such as the Bokoblins and Moblins take on different appearances. And finally, Exhibit F. We have time manipulation game mechanics in Breath of the Wild 2, which could be hinting at a bigger time travel plot. Now for the counter-arguments. I said this previously, but Link wearing this outfit could be more of a callback to the ancient hero, and the legend told by Impa 10,000 years ago heavily involves the Sheikah technology, something that doesn't make an appearance in this trailer. In regards to the floating islands and architecture not seen in the first game, it's also plausible that these originate from a different world or realm. I'll be going into more detail regarding this a bit later on in the video. And then there's the changes in Hyrule's landmarks. The missing ancient Hylian pillars could simply be this game's draw distance. The Switch isn't a very powerful system compared to others, so the game doesn't always load in structures or ruins that are technically visible. The same could also be said for the Deku Tree, but there's more regarding him that contradicts the time travel theory. Masterworks has a passage on page 229 written by the structural lead artist Manabu Takahara. I apologize if I butchered that name because I probably did. In this part, he talks about Breath of the Wild's Deku Tree. It mentions a young tree who, with the passing of an eternity, became the guardian of the Master Sword. The next part states, how many sacred maidens and heroes opposing countless calamities has this ancient tree witnessed? It suggests that there have been multiple calamities, and that the one from Breath of the Wild and the events 10,000 years ago are only the most recent. In fact, the Deku Tree himself states that he's watched over Hyrule since time immemorial. If we are taking place in a Hyrule, around the time of events of Impa's tapestry, then the Deku Tree should be in the background of the shot. So, what if this Hyrule is instead a much older one that takes place before the Deku Tree's appearance, or at a time where he hasn't reached his full growth? Well, the background reveals the Akala Citadel, a structure that probably shouldn't exist around this time period. In addition, the tower from the ranch ruins is also present. So unless there's a retcon of information, time traveling to an ancient Hyrule doesn't seem plausible. Remember that, while much of Masterworks' information can be questioned, this passage comes from one of the game's developers. But this leaves us with an important question. If this is present-day Hyrule, what happened to the Deku Tree? As said previously, it could be draw distance, but there are other possibilities. Since Ganondorf has been freed from whatever was restraining him, he may have attacked the Korok Forest and cursed the Deku Tree, similar to Ocarina of Time. It was the resting place of the Master Sword, so he'd have every reason to target it. It's also possible that, similar to Hyrule Castle, the Korok Forest has risen to the skies and has become a floating island. It's true that all the islands we've seen are new locations featuring new structures, but that doesn't mean that none of Hyrule's locations have risen above the clouds. There's many possible answers to this question, so it doesn't have to be time travel. On the topic of Death Mountain, the reason it was so active in Breath of the Wild was due to Rudania. Volcanic eruptions were much more frequent and the amount of lava on the mountain increased. It got so hot that it interfered with the Goron's mining operations. Since Rudania has stopped its rampage, Death Mountain would have settled down and maybe even become inactive. And as stated previously, the redesign of the monsters may have simply been due to Ganondorf's increased power. Others have pointed out that the positioning of the sun and angle of the shadows cast is slightly different in the sequel's trailer, and some believe that Hyrule's planet spin may have been reversed, and that it will play a big role in the sequel's plot. However, it's worth noting that due to the Earth's slight tilt on its axis as it orbits around our sun, the angles of the shadows change depending on the season, and that's because the angle of the sun would be slightly different. It makes sense that its positioning and angle of the shadows differ to Breath of the Wild's. Plus, the lighting may have been adjusted just so that the shots from the trailer look nice. One detail that is interesting is Link's face. We only get a clear shot of it when his arm is consumed by malice. First off, I need to address that it could simply be the fact that this is a third-person game. You don't spend much time looking at his face, aside from the occasional cutscenes. But if there are details being hidden, I have a feeling that it involves the shot of Malice going after Link. Assuming that the green hand merges with his to stop the spread of Malice, and that the markings on his shoulder and back represent a spreading of this curse, perhaps there's something on Link's face which suggests a gradual corruption of sorts. Breath of the Wild's Malice was capable of reanimating the skulls of deceased monsters, even corrupting the spirit of Ice Nadra. What's to say that something like this can't happen to Link himself? Especially since the Ganondorf we see would be much more powerful than Calamity Ganon. It doesn't even have to be a huge part of the hero's face that's messed up. I can just imagine one of his eyes being replaced with the ones found on the Bogs of Malice all across Hyrule. If that ends up being his design, I'll legitimately freak out because it would be incredible. Now, back to the floating islands. Remember how we discussed it being a huge part of the time travel theory? We suggested that, instead of them existing because the game takes place in Hyrule's past, they originate from a different world or realm of sorts. Now, don't get me wrong, this shot clearly shows these islands directly above Hyrule. However, with the other shots, there's a sea of clouds below the islands. Either this is incredibly high up, or not all the floating islands are accessed through Hyrule. We do know that some of these floating islands have to be in the same world, as there's the debris closely matching with the architecture in the Sky Islands, but perhaps some of these islands have, for some reason, left their own realm to merge with Hyrule's. One possibility is that the area we see above the clouds is the Sacred Realm, resting place of the Triforce. Previous depictions of it show a land in the sky, such as A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. In fact, the Sacred Realm of both games feature structures, some in the background of the former's official art, while Link and Zelda visit the one from the latter, with stonework not too different from what's seen in the sequel's trailer. To some extent, time travel may serve a purpose in the story, but at most it will probably be Link traveling to different pocket dimensions or something. I don't think Hyrule itself will be an ancient version of what's seen in the first game. Another theory, and one that I personally believe, is that the location Link visits in Breath of the Wild 2 is connected to the realm above the cloud barrier seen in Skyward Sword. I've previously discussed the portals that the dragons fly through at sunset, and their similarity to the ones that open up allowing Link to reach the surface. It's possible that this barrier is still up at the time of Breath of the Wild, and the place the elemental spirits travel to is the same realm that Skyloft resides in. In fact, one of the NPCs at the Woodland Stable, Shamay, directly references Skyward Sword. She believes that long ago, people used to live in the sky. Once you complete her quest, she goes on to state that she wants to visit the land in the sky and ride a really big bird. Before the E3 2021 trailer, this seemed like a mere reference to Skyward Sword, but given the context we have now, this could also be foreshadowing of what's to come in the game's sequel. I won't go over much of this theory as I plan to discuss it in an upcoming video on Skyward Sword's potential connections to Breath of the Wild 2. I'll end off this analysis by saying that we may be getting more news on the sequel much earlier than we think. According to Bill Trinan, Nintendo plans on showing more of the game over the coming months to the next year or so. Apparently the game will be releasing in 2022, but from the way it's worded it may be pushed back. And honestly, they should take all the time they need to make this game. As of now, it's still referred to as the sequel to Breath of the Wild, but apparently they do have a title for the game, and if they reveal that title now, it would be a massive spoiler to the game. So hey, time travel is still technically an option, but know that there are some issues with it. For those who made it to the end of this analysis, I thank you for watching. This turned out to be an even bigger project than I expected. I'm starting to see a pattern here with my videos being longer than I think they're gonna be. You know, new trailer. So if you enjoyed it, then please consider subscribing. Expect more Breath of the Wild 2 videos in the future, especially since a ton of collaborations are in the works. I'm planning to release my next video at the end of June, so stay tuned for that. I've been Nintendo Black Crisis, and I'll see you all next time.